Okay. Let's move on to the Glenn Greenwald story. Because Glenn, oh man. So I saw this actually. I saw the tweet on Twitter of Governor Abbott, and Governor Abbott actually was tweeting about creating a space that is safe for Jewish students. Now, Governor Abbott, this is where the hypocrisy comes in. We've been talking about hypocrisy a lot the last couple of nights, but this is where the hypocrisy comes in, because typically it was the Republican Party or members of the Republican Party that said they didn't want to deal with this whole idea of safe spaces and wokeism, more so from the politicians, the Republican politicians, right? And Governor Abbott was one of those people. But now, all of a sudden, because it involves a certain segment of the population, Governor Abbott is willing to embrace safe spaces. We got to call it all out. So Glenn Greenwald, I think, was the perfect person the perfect person to get on Governor Abbott about this. Let's dive in.
Republican Governor Greg Abbott of Texas has long been popular among conservatives, and that's what makes it so bizarre that yesterday he issued an executive order. And when doing so, he invoked a phrase to justify that executive order that is probably the single most mocked and ridiculed phrase in right-wing discourse. And he didn't invoke this phrase ironically or as a way of making some kind of point. He invoked it earnestly. And the way that I know that is because he has a long history of embracing measures very similar to the one that he embraced yesterday, and has done so repeatedly for the same objective. And it's not just Greg Abbott, but red state legislatures and Republican governors throughout the country have also embraced similar measures for similar reasons. And so before we comment on that, let me just show you exactly what it is that he said here from the office of the Texas Governor Greg Abbott on March 27th, 2024. You see the headline, Governor Abbott fights anti-Semitic acts at Texas colleges and universities. And he's touting a executive order that he issued, and it says the following, quote, the governor's executive order requires that all higher education institutions in Texas review their free speech policies to establish appropriate punishments for anti-Semitic rhetoric, which is another word for speech.
That's right. So let's pause here for a second, because this can change. Remember what the Rabbi Barkley, when he was debating Candace Owens, remember what he said, that when it comes to the definition of anti-Semitism, that it's based on feeling. Remember that? So they can always change the type of rhetoric to fit that narrative. So Glenn is right when he says he said anti-Semitic rhetoric, which is another word for speech. He's correct. That's basically what they're saying. And we're noticing that the definition keeps changing, right? So think about that for students in Texas. This is just another way for them to try to prevent the students at the colleges from protesting.
On college and university campuses, ensure that policies that address the sharp rise of anti-Semitic acts are enforced, and include the definition of anti-Semitism in free speech policies. Now, note here, among other things, that he is not protecting all Texas students from being attacked for their views or for their religious beliefs or for their identity. He's issuing an executive order that is designed to protect one group of students and only one group of students, namely Jewish students, from only one type of bigotry, namely anti-Semitism. He's not protecting students from anti-Black racism or anti-white racism or Islamophobia or transphobia or xenophobia or any other kind of bigotry. This is a measure that is designed to protect one particular group of people in the society identified by a demographic characteristic, and is designed to require that universities enact measures to combat a certain kind of rhetoric aimed at a certain kind of group.
So, to that point, How is that any different from the complaints that have come from conservative politicians who have complained, like people like Ron DeSantis, for example, have complained about CRT, which is critical race theory, right, which tends to focus on a particular group. How is that any different from those complaints when they said we should not be singling out people by their race or their gender? Everybody should have the same type of, education. We should not single people out, and we're all supposed to have the students learn together, etc. We're not going to have affirmative action. We're not going to do these things. How is that any different? So what I've told you before, and what you're seeing that is starting to come to light with more and more people as more hypocrisy is exposed, is that at the end of the day, it is okay to do that when it comes to one particular group. So what we're seeing, folks, is that our politicians are showing us that one particular group is better than others. They are prioritizing that particular group because Governor Abbott isn't making this type of law. This is done by executive order, by the way. He's not making this type of law in reference to any other group at colleges in Texas. Let's continue.
Not hateful rhetoric in general, just rhetoric that he deems to be hateful in particular toward this group in particular. The executive order that he signed is here, and it went on, quote, it cites the following: incidents of anti-Semitism have increased since Hamas's attack, and the proliferation of anti-Semitism at public universities is particularly concerning. Multiple protests and walkouts have been staged by university student organizations, with students chanting anti-Semitic phrases, such as "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free."
Now, see, this is where someone like Bill Ackman comes in, because you have to remember it was Bill Ackman who actually railed about that phrase on social media. He was the one that pushed for Claudine Gay to be removed as the president of Harvard. He was the one that's got the ball rolling on this. And Bill Ackman is a billionaire. So this was another example to show you how billionaires are actually making decisions in this country. And especially those that are Zionists. Remember what Miko Palit said? These are very powerful. Zionists are very powerful. They're a powerful network of people. So add billionaire to that and just imagine how much that you can do. So he was the one that got the ball rolling on this. That gives Governor Abbott the permission and other people the permission to say, okay, well, that rhetoric is anti-Semitic. Now they got people out there saying that Christ is King is also problematic now too. What else is going to be next?
Now, there again, he's explicitly stating that the motivation for adopting this measure is not that students are being violently attacked, but that instead they're hearing political phrases that upset them, like Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. I thought that it was pretty much of a consensus among conservatives and Republicans and people on the right that words are not violence. Mm-hmm. And yet, again, over and over, this executive order cites things like speech and rhetoric and political phrases. It then goes on. Section 519315C2 of the Texas Education Code provides that students should not participate in, and higher education institutions should not allow expression that is unlawful or disrupts the operations and of the institution.
Now, let's highlight the word expression, because that could mean anything. Does that mean that you can't wear a T-shirt that has a Palestinian flag on it? That's expression. It can relate to your clothing. What if you have a Palestinian flag like on your car? Like the same way, some people have like Dominican flags or Puerto Rican flags on their car. Like, what do you mean by expression? That's vague, and that can be applied to so many different things. I hope people realize just how dangerous this is. Because I know some people will point and they'll say, oh, it's just Texas. For now, this can also spread. What does this mean? What does it mean? Listen, I'm going to tell you how this went very wrong when I was in high school. When I was in high school, we had a new principal. His name was Dr. Parker. Dr. Parker, and you had to call him doctor. Dr. Parker was a no-nonsense type of dude. He wasn't there long. He didn't stay the whole year because Dr. Parker pissed off a lot of people, and he took a promotion at the as a superintendent at the board, right? So Dr. Parker decided to create this rule that students were not allowed to wear Marilyn Manson t-shirts. Now, all this started because one kid wore a Marilyn Manson t-shirt that said, I'll say this on here, COCK sucker, right? And it was a Marilyn Manson like band t-shirt or whatever. So he made a rule that you could not wear Marilyn Manson t-shirts. So you got to understand at this point in time, like Marilyn Manson was actually pretty popular. I don't know where Marilyn's at today, but at that point in time, he was pretty popular. Then in turn, what happened is that those students said, that's not fair because that is a band that I listen to. So what about all the other students that wear t-shirts of the band that they listen to? Then Dr. Parker came back and changed the rule and made an announcement that said you could not wear any band t-shirts at all. Students actually staged a walkout. Dr. Parker wasn't there that much longer after that. So when we talk about this expression, that can mean so many different things.
And whereas anti-Semitism and the harassment of Jewish students have no place on Texas university campuses and will not be tolerated by my administration, therefore I, Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, by virtue of the power and authority vested in me by the Constitution and laws of the state of Texas, hereby direct all Texas higher education institutions to do the following. 1, review and update free speech policies. This is a Republican governor, a conservative governor, part of a political movement in the United States that has spent years objecting to attacks on free speech on college campuses, speech codes on college campuses in the name of protecting certain minority groups from bigoted speech. And this is exactly what this order is designed to do. He is directing that Texas universities, colleges, update their free speech policies to address the sharp rise in anti-Semitic speech. And then he adds on, and acts, but the only kinds of acts cited on university campuses are things like chanting. Obviously, if somebody attacks Jewish students or threatens Jewish students with violence, it's already a crime. Or it's already a violation of campus code, but it's also a crime in society. You can't physically attack people or threaten to attack people with violence anywhere in the United States without committing a crime. You don't need to change free speech codes at Texas campuses to address that. You just need to change Texas free speech codes to constrict the kinds of views that people are permitted to express about a foreign country, Israel, if you want to make Jewish students feel more comfortable, which is exactly what Greg Abbott, when justifying this executive order, said was his goal. It went on.
Right.
2, ensure that these policies are being enforced on campuses and that groups such as the Palestine Solidarity Committee and Students for Justice in Palestine are disciplined for violating these policies. He does not say that pro-Israel student groups should be punished in any way if they violate these policies, or any other group for that matter.
No, he's singling out the Palestinian groups. And this is very problematic. This is exactly what I was trying to point towards. Notice this doesn't apply to any other organizations or groups on campus. He's only singling out the Palestinian groups.
Singling out one group of students that he wants to protect, Jewish students, one type of speech that he wants to constrict, which is criticism of Israel or pro-Palestinian speech, and one type of student group that he wants to target and punish, which are pro-Palestinian groups. Now, all of these measures are completely in line with Greg Abbott's own personal political views. He's a fanatical supporter of Israel. Greg Abbott's not Jewish. He's an evangelical Christian. And he has talked about the importance of Israel to him personally and to his religion and to his culture. And he has every right to be a fanatical supporter of Israel if he wants, for whatever reasons, religious, political, ideological. That's, of course, within his rights. But to trifle with speech codes on college campuses in Texas, by tightening the permissive range of speech to prevent people from expressing views that Greg Abbott finds offensive, to protect a particular cause that is important to Greg Abbott, and to punish student groups whose cause and whose views are antithetical to his, is the exact kind of tyranny that conservatives have been denouncing, rightfully so, when it has come from the liberal left in multiple ways, including on college campuses over the last decade. He goes on, quote, number 3, include the definition of anti-Semitism adopted by the state of Texas in section 448.001 of the Texas Government Code in university free speech policies to guide university personnel and students on what constitutes anti-Semitic speech. Now, I believe that we have the tweet, and if we don't, we should get it.
Pause here for just a second. Now, what is the best way? Because we want to talk about solutions as well. And Trell actually already hit it in the chat. What is the best way for them to fight back against this? Trell said, it's all these if all these athletes start protesting, I bet they would not do this. Bingo. Because a lot of the colleges in Texas, right? These are sports schools. I call them sports schools, but football is king in Texas. So I went to a sports school too, so I know football is king in Texas. If you were able to get, for all those students in those organizations, the Palestinian organizations, reach out to members of the football team. Reach out to members on the basketball team. And if you can get them to walk out, then maybe some things could change. Because unfortunately, when it comes to a lot of those colleges, particularly in the South, Southwest, Southeast, sports really matters. And these colleges really depend on game days, boosters, etc. And the last thing they want is for these sports programs to fall apart. They care more about that than they do about the academic departments, just keeping it real. If you can get the football players, the basketball players, if you can get them to join you in solidarity and have some type of a walkout, which is a very peaceful demonstration, then maybe things could change and maybe they would listen. You got to hit them in the pocket. You got to hit them where the money is at. Take away the athletes. They'll listen. It's a reality. They'll listen. You know how many professional athletes came from colleges in Texas?
Where Governor Abbott explains the reason for this executive order and specifically says that he wants to create safe spaces for Jewish students. So I don't see that tweet here. So if we're going to get that tweet though, but when Greg Abbott announced his executive order, he explicitly said that the reason for this executive order was that he wants to create what he explicitly called safe spaces on Texas's campus. Let me just show you the tweet that Governor Abbott posted when he announced the executive order. There you see it on the screen. He said, this is Governor Abbott yesterday, quote, anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Texas. Today, I issued an executive order to fight the increase in acts of anti-Semitism at Texas colleges and universities. Texas stands with our Jewish students. We will ensure our college campuses are safe spaces for the Jewish community. Now, just imagine, had this been about any other group, imagine if Governor Abbott had said anti-black racism. Can we put that tweet back on the screen, please? Anti-black racism will not be tolerated in Texas. Today, I'm issuing an executive order to fight the increase in acts of racism at Texas colleges. Texas stands with our black students. We will ensure our college campuses are safe spaces for the black community.
Pause for a second. So this is where the hypocrisy comes in. And this is what I was pointing to before. We're seeing a lot of hypocrisy the past couple of weeks, because for years, We have seen people like Governor Abbott, like Ron DeSantis, Republican politicians actually, rail against this idea of safe spaces and refer to it as, this is woke culture and we reject that. But that was in reference to other groups. To Glenn's point, that was in reference to Black Americans. That was in reference to the LGBTQ community. That was in reference to Latino community. That was in reference to the minority groups. But when it comes to Israel, and see, this is how, again, everything shifts when it comes to Israel. This is why you'll see people actually be correct about the Ukraine war and say, stop funding Ukraine. We need to get out of this. But once you change that country to Israel, all of a sudden, everything shifts. So you have to understand who is actually telling us what to do here, because the United States government is willing to bend over backwards for Israel, but Netanyahu won't even listen to one small demand from Joe Biden and says, I'm going to do what I want. Netanyahu says he's going to do what he wants. This is why this happens, is because we have so much big money in electoral politics, because the Israeli lobby owns a lot of these politicians. You should not have an AIPAC. You should not have it. How do you have a lobby that represents another country in this country having so much control over our politicians? So that shouldn't be there. But this is another hypocritical moment. Now, all of a sudden, when it comes to protecting Jewish students, now all of a sudden, safe spaces are okay. So no, this is a problem.
Imagine the anger and mockery that would have provoked among almost every conservative I can think of. Or imagine if he had said, transphobia will not be tolerated in Texas. Today, I issued an executive order to fight the increase in acts of transphobia on Texas campuses. Texas stands with our trans students. We will ensure our college campuses are safe spaces for the LGBT community. That would have probably led to his impeachment. Why is this any different? Why is this any better? To constrict speech, to direct administrators to trifle with free speech codes, to more broadly define anti-Semitism?
And also, conservatives need to speak out against this the same way that people are speaking out against Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire's decisions. People like you guys, like, if you're watching, you're conservative, you should be railing against this, pushing back heavily on Governor Abbott, because this is ridiculous.
To punish the expression of political phrases that make Jewish students feel unsafe, to turn college campuses into safe spaces, not for everybody, but solely for Jewish students, who, according to Governor Abbott, and if you look at the executive order as we just did, he's not claiming there's an epidemic of violence against Jewish students. He's claiming that there's a expression of views against Israel that's making them feel uncomfortable. And the argument has always been, I've been a big supporter of this argument, that college students are adults. And if there's any place in the country where free speech should reign, where dissent should reign, where even taboos should be able to be permitted to be expressed, where orthodoxies have to be challenged without constraints, it's an academia. That's what academia is for. And one of the things you send your adult children to college in order to do is learn how to hear arguments that make them uncomfortable and to engage with them and to think critically, not to be shielded and protected by them. And yet here you have a Republican governor doing exactly that, which conservatives have said for years they find reprehensible and dangerous. And again, he's not doing it as tit for tat or ironically, because he's been doing it for many years, long before October 7th, as we'll show you. Now, one of the people, as I was saying, who, in addition to Candace Owen and Tucker Carlson and several others, who is objecting, and I think this is the first time he's stood up and spoke out on this in response to Governor Abbott, is Christopher Rufo, who has been working with Governor DeSantis on the Florida educational system, and in particular trying to remove notions that any particular group of people will be discriminated against by dogma or by university policy. And Christopher Rufo, in response to Governor Abbott's executive order said the following, quote, "I am committed to the fight against anti-Semitism on campus, but I am concerned about the highlighted provisions in Governor Abbott's executive order, which instructs universities to, quote, update free speech policies to prohibit, quote, anti-Semitic speech. How is such a policy different from DEI programs, which are diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that conservatives have begun to focus on?"
Because let me jump in here and explain to you what's actually happened here. Because remember, one of the things that was eventually revealed from Bill Ackman, who was pushing back against DEI and all this stuff when the protests happened, is that it wasn't so much that he had a problem with DEI, but the problem that he had was the fact that it did not include Jewish people. That's where that came from. That was revealed later on. The problem that he had wasn't so much about the plagiarism. His wife was caught with plagiarism as well. The problem that he had was the fact that it did not include Jewish people. The masks are coming off, ladies and gentlemen.
In a very negative way. He says, how is such a policy different from DEI programs promising to prohibit, quote, anti-black speech? And why not include anti-white speech, which, as I have shown in my reporting, is institutionalized at the University of Texas? What is the rationale for one but not the other, or the others? He goes on, the problem to me seems to be conduct rather than speech, shutting down speakers, threatening students, mobilizing mobs, calling for violence, all of which can be regulated as prohibited conduct with the universal rather than particular policy. Exactly. If you really want to limit conduct, and I think you need to be very careful that you're not limiting legitimate political protest, the idea that you're going to enact special rules for special groups is madness.
But here we are.
And that you're going to single out particular student groups that have a policy view and an ideology that differ from the Republican governor is so blatantly tyrannical. Why would these rules not apply to every single student equally?
I told you guys that this is where we were headed. I told you this is what the ultimate goal they were trying to do. They're basically trying to make the United States like the United States of Israel. I told you, because they are very angry about the fact that so many people are supporting the Palestinian, right to freedom, their right for self-determination. They were not expecting that, and they didn't know how to handle that. And so now it's like, let's see if we can do everything that we can to make sure that the priority here is going to be for those who are Jewish in this country. Now, the same people that'll sit up there and tell you that we're all supposed to be treated the same. Nobody should be given, preference over another. But here are those same people giving preference over other groups. So that's the hypocrisy. And I sincerely hope more of you that are Republican, I sincerely hope that you push back on that and call out Governor Abbott for that, because it's ridiculous. Think about where this could affect all of us in reference to free speech.